This is the Dharma Podcast at dharmapodcast.org, and this is show number 172. It was recorded September 9th, 2009, and it's titled Unifying and Differentiating Realities.
Okay, so how many people were here at the last talk I did here? Okay. All right. Some. Okay. How many people have a regular meditation practice? You don't have to have one. Okay. How many people are fairly new to practice in some way? Consider yourselves new to practice. Okay. All right. We're all across the board. Okay. So that's good. Yeah, Jesus is supposed to raise your hand. I say, who's new to practice?
Every day.
Every day is a new beginning. Okay, so before I ruin everything by talking, I want to do a little exercise, experiential exercise with everyone, if I may. So I could just ask everyone to reconnect with their breath. And I just want to suggest a couple points of investigation that we'll then have the opportunity to discuss afterwards. So I'm actually going to give us 3 things in sequence that I'd like us to pay attention to without thinking about, using the mind of meditation that we've just been cultivating. This comes partly out of the work I've been doing in teaching meditation to university students. I'm very inventive about how to present some of these things in the semester system. So I'd like us first, just for a few minutes, to turn our attention to our sense of hearing. And since it's fairly quiet here, a lot of what we may be hearing is the space between sounds, or the silence, and it's actually fine. Just turn our attention, just in the same way we do to the breath, to our perception of sound. So, and I'd like us specifically to notice how sound rises out of silence. And in our minds we seem to place it in space. And then it falls away to silence. I'm going to ask a bit of a trick question. It's not really a right answer. I'd like you to notice that quality of sound, and then I'd like you to notice the silence. And the trick question is, where is that silence located? And if you find that question irritating, that's okay. This is Zen. So you can notice the irritation and know that I'm stirring up our comfortable meditation for a purpose. So if you find yourself getting drawn into thought, that's good, because that's the next thing I'd like you to look at. So, If you happen to be sitting in a mind that's completely empty of thought, great, enjoy it. But if a thought should happen to arise, see if you can keep your mind watchful for the next thought to arise. And I'd like you to notice that it's somewhat similar to our experience of sound, actually. It seems to arise out of this background. We don't know where thought comes from. And then if we don't grab onto it, it goes away. And the difference is that we have a subtle tendency to identify with a thought that appears in the mind. And if this should happen to you, just notice it. Maybe see if it's possible to let go of that feeling of identification. Just watch the thought rise and fall without getting caught. If your mind's empty, that's fine. Just in the same way we looked at the silence, watch the field of awareness. So I'll ask you a version of the same trick question, which is whether you have thoughts or perceptions in the mind or not. See if you can just feel the field of awareness. And again, I'd like to ask you where it is, where it's located, the field of awareness. If you notice something like shouting in your mind, that's your thought. Last thing I'd like you to notice is your visual field. So without looking around, just become aware of your visual field. Open your eyes if they were closed. And just take in what's in your field of vision. And in the Zen version of sensory apparatus, thought's considered a sense, because it's as though, that's where I was joking about the shout in the distance, it's as though a thought arises in our minds just in the same way that sound arises in our field of perception. But our visual field we're so closely identified with that it's hard to feel a sense of it arising in the field because it seems so continuous and we're so closely identified with it. But just without identifying or labeling what you see in your visual field, just see if you can notice that the mind automatically wants to lump objects in the field of vision into categories. So it wants to, probably everyone can see their legs. So the mind just very subtly labels that my legs, me, and that's over here. And it very subtly labels everything we don't think of ourselves as over there or something else. But actually, before the mind makes those decisions, we just have pure perception, and actually that's what I'm pointing to. So, is it possible that all the objects in the field of awareness, imagine we were just born, or we were just given sight, we would have no idea what anything was. And this is actually the experience of people who are suddenly given sight after having been congenitally blind. There's been studies done on this, and they can pretty immediately tell the difference between light and dark things, different shapes and colors, but that's it. Everything else is added by the mind. But we lose track of what's prior to the mind. In a sense, nothing's prior to the mind. But let's not get caught in that. Actually, the raw sensory data that just comes in through our eyes is actually shape, color, form, size, texture. Space is not included. We don't know how far away things are without processing them through our minds. And not only that, but the way it comes onto our retinas, everything's inverted. So that if we were to see things as they actually were, we would see everything upside down. So we were actually seeing them. But the mind turns it around so that it makes sense. So I just want to check in with people on what they just experienced in that little brief exercise. Anybody like to share? There's no right or wrong answer, so it's easy. Yeah.
Something that's always interesting to me is when oftentimes when I start to drop down, when the discursive mind settles, my mind begins to free associate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the shadow. It's like instead of sensible discursiveness, it's nonsensical.
Okay.
Random discursiveness.
Okay.
It's something I almost always notice.
That's interesting.
It's hard to kind of ride that. There's like a line, I feel, of kind of arousal without being hyper-aroused.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of maintain awareness without...
That's interesting. It's a bit like the dream state. The mind doesn't make the customary associations of wanting things to make logical sense or linear. Good, okay. It's important... In practice, we begin, and because we always have mixed groups, so we always have beginners with experienced practitioners, and so experienced practitioners tend to hear again and again, and actually we do get conditioned in a certain way that emptiness is the only place we're headed. And emptiness is important because the mind is full. By the time we start to look at the mind, doesn't matter what age we are, by the time we start to look at the mind, it's already partly conditioned. It's like an attic that's stuffed full of crap, right? Before you can even straighten it out, you got to haul out some of the crap, right? So we tend to begin practice by emptying the mind out as completely as possible, and then we add a few things back in. And when I speak to the Zen tradition, I actually, it's quite a broad tradition, and I've had quite a broad background in it through strange karmic circumstances. Partly being a journalist, partly having done this book, One Bird, One Stone, which is a chronicle of Zen practice in America, and I interviewed 100 different teachers and senior practitioners in putting that book together. So I got a broad idea of how everybody, the lineages in America do practice. I also went to the Naropa Institute, so I got an eyeful of Tibetan practice there. And I've also, just along the way, just formed a lot of friendships with Theravada and Vipassana teachers. And then because Zen hurt so much, I had to start doing yoga. And then I found the yoga tiring, so I had to do Qigong to build up my energy. and so I feel like I've been across the board in the Eastern practices that I've met masters in a lot of these practices. And you know what? Everybody thinks their way is right. It's just part of human awareness. So And it's natural. If something's worked for you, you assume it's going to work for the next person. You just think, I did it this way. But I realize, and I share this with you, and I'll continue to do it until they make me not speak here anymore. But is that the people? Form is really important. I came to Zen practice because I needed the form and I needed the discipline. So I don't dispute that form is really, really important. But within the form, I think that the practitioners who really find their way in the practice, in all these practices, have found a way to freely interact, creatively interact with the form. And it's okay to do that. And if you feel that your practice is going dead because you're repeating the same process again and again, well, if you've been practicing for a little while, like once you've been practicing for a year or two, you know what it feels like when you're actually practicing. And you know what it feels like when you're spacing out. And you know what it feels like when you're thinking or not doing it. Sometimes it may take a while. I remember one time early in practice, I spent somewhere between 6 months and a year just sitting down every day and thinking. And then one day I realized, wait a minute, I'm sitting down and taking the form, but how long have I been doing this? I've just been thinking, It's somehow it took me, because there's an amnesia that can come, right? Mm-hmm. But really, we know what it's like. After a while, we'll catch on. We'll notice that we're the good things about practicing start to slip away. We may be less calm. Speaking of less calm, I just proved today that life is suffering because I spent about 4 hours in the motor vehicle department. So it's proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. The basic premise, life is suffering, at least in the motor vehicle department. Now, really what that means is just that, so this is a good example. We're trained to empty the mind, but then the first thing we start hearing are these concepts. But somehow we still keep this idea that the mind's supposed to be empty. But actually the Buddha did this training in emptiness. They're called the jhana states or samadhi states. And if you talk to people in Vipassana or Theravadan practice, they can delineate all the states. And those actually exist in yogic practices too. Depending on what system, oftentimes you see a 9-step system of all the stages of samadhi. First you're focused on objects, then the objects start to fall away, you start to enter bliss, and then bliss falls away, and eventually you're aware of awareness without any contents, and then there's just this little sliver of this feeling of consciousness alone. And but the Buddha had been through all those steps, and he didn't feel enlightened. So he went on to, in some sense, go beyond those practices. And I'm sure many people had gone beyond before, because at the end of the samadhi practices, you fall into emptiness. And emptiness is a non-experience. You don't even know you have it. Because when you've really landed in emptiness, you kind of die. The bell rings, and then the bell rings, and the period's over. So it's a non-experience. How many people have ever had time slip away in sitting meditation, or sometimes in some other activity? Okay, so that's a sign of absorption, or what they call samadhi. Okay, and when it's complete, you can actually hear the bell ring to begin the period. A lot of you have experienced this, I'm sure, and then you hear the bell ring to end the period, and you've just been gone. And when you come back, it's as though, the funny thing is some people really fear that experience, and if you fear it, I don't blame you, but we somehow never doubt we'll come back to our bodies, but we somehow doubt we'll come back to our minds. But you come back to your body, come back to your mind, somehow wherever you don't go, because it's a non-experience, somehow you land again, and here you are. But the self is like this suit of clothes, and once it's been off, you put it back on, it doesn't fit so well, it's a little looser. And every time that happens, it's a little bit looser. But it's natural to process this in the thinking mind. The important thing is that if you become trapped in the thinking mind, then it becomes mere philosophy. And then it's, as far as practice goes, it's useless. But the reason I disturb our practice with the thinking mind is because, in Zen we always do that. And it doesn't hurt to identify that that's actually happening. Because we can hear people speak about it, and then we go away and we think, well, I'm not supposed to think. But if you actually never think about the practice, it's hard to grow insight. So insight grows from the friction between the thinking, personal, ego-centered mind. I use that term very unwillingly because we have so many associations with it. But the personal self, the personal mind, and this mind of emptiness. And it's in the transition between and in whether we know it or not. If we have an experience in sitting practice, we're going to import it back into our thinking mind, and we're going to interpret it. So we might as well know that we're doing that. So when we hear that life is suffering as the first noble truth, well, that's first of all, it's not a fixed truth. It's a concept, and no concepts are fixed. Concepts are tools, right? It's true in one situation. It's true if you're having a very high ecstatic experience of tantric sexuality at that moment, life is not going to be suffering, it's or whatever, whatever your very high experience is. But it means something else. It means that, if you're living as a human being, you're going to face suffering. You can't get away from it, It's a basic part of the condition. I struggled with this a lot because I thought I wasn't supposed to think. Then I was thinking about it. Then I didn't know what I was supposed to think about it. Then I thought, but it's not suffering. It's joy. It's supposed to be joy, but we just get all tangled up. But, so I spent a lot of time getting lost and trying to sort this out. It helps to know that we don't want to be sitting on our cushion being caught in thought processes, but we're going to spend some time processing what happens. And then what we want to do is we take it back to the practice and we point it back in. So, and I apologize for going on so linearly about that, but it's kind of important because if you have an insight, the way you store it, if you have a it's like being in love. You're not always feeling the tippy top of love filled to the brim, Sometimes you're annoyed with a person, but then you remember conceptually, wait a minute, I love this person. And then you can kind of download that information because you've got it stored. So we remember that we all know that we're individual selves, so nobody's denying that, but what we forget is that we're also one self, So when I point us back to the field of silence, to the field of awareness, and we talk about it, I'm doing that to raise a point of practice that we can remember and we can go back and look at the next time we practice. So people often will feel reluctant to come out of the silence or the emptiness of practice. And I don't blame you. But since I can't go home with everyone, I'm better off giving you some tools and techniques that you can go and investigate by yourself, and just know that practitioners throughout time have done this. And if it feels like there's something missing in your practice, when I work with students, and I work with many, many students in this practice, oftentimes that questioning mind isn't there. It's become quiescent. It's become mere quietude, being attached to the silence, peacefulness. Silence and peacefulness is great. But, that doesn't go away. That will always return to your practice. So it can take a little stirring up. And what I'm doing is giving you a filter. And you can suck out some of the sediment. And then it will return to silence, but it will be emptier than ever. So all that being said, what did you notice about the field of silence? And maybe just to cut to the chase, what does that have in common with the field of awareness in the thinking when we're looking at our minds? What did you notice about it? When I asked you where it is, a quill question. Yes?
They seem to be in the same place, and they seem to both be everywhere.
Okay, so if they're both everywhere, what place are they in? I mean, there's no wrong answer, so you're... Okay.
Just spatially, it seemed to be no place.
It's no place. Okay, that's what I was fishing for. In Zen or in Buddhism, we tend to use the negative to point to because all the ways of positively stating things have been used up. So in the theistic practices, we're used to hearing about oneness or union or that our awareness is everywhere. And, the Buddha was searching for a fresh way to present. I also think that he made some advances on the way people were perceiving it as well. And there are many, many levels at which this can be perceived. And as we grow our practice, we'll perceive it in different ways. But, saying it's nowhere is the same as saying it's everywhere, isn't it? You can't place it because you can't even say everything is one, because when you really have that experience, one only makes sense in comparison to many, or it's so unified that you can't even say one, right? Because it doesn't stand against. It's got nothing to compare against. So So let me ask you another leading question. So once you say it's nowhere or it's everywhere, I think that's really important that I was able to. What's your name?
Frank.
Frank. That I talked you very quickly into that space. That's kind of important because if you go away and you let yourself consider that a little bit, wow, everywhere is the same place as nowhere. Okay, that means that concept just kind of falls apart, right? Okay, but when we come out of the experience, we're still going to call it something, right? So is he right if he calls it everywhere? Yes. Is he wrong? Yes. Is he right if he calls it nowhere? Yes. Is he wrong?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Every single concept in our minds is like that. So as long as we hold concepts like that, we will have no problem with it. Okay. It means that they're a tool. Anybody ever try and use a lug wrench to unscrew a Phillips head screw? You can play with a lug wrench all day, and you can't undo the Phillips head screw. You need a Phillips head screwdriver, right? So that's what it's all things are one, but you still need the Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, so that's what our concepts are like, right? They're a tool for a specific use. If you get attached to oneness, and Zen teachers will do this to you all the time without explaining it to you. So, if you get attached to oneness, they'll start pushing you into emptiness. You get attached to emptiness, they'll start pushing you into oneness. After a while, you've been back and forth so much, you go, oh, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. I'm not going through this anymore. All right. It's all conceptual. Sometimes it may be useful to view it that way. It may not. But what starts to happen is the apparent separation between these ideas falls apart, and the apparent separation between the perceptions falls apart. So, if my perceptual field is nowhere and everywhere, does everybody know what Frank is pointing to when he talks to them? I mean, if you look at the field of silence or awareness, it's really hard to locate it. Is that not so? Even if you just close your eyes for a minute and go inside, think of me, this feeling of meanness. What is the feeling of meanness like? Individual, selfhood. What does it feel like? Familiar, yeah, okay.
It feels like movement.
It feels like it has solidity. To me, it feels like it crystallizes out of that emptiness. It feels like it's a point in that emptiness, right? So, but the reason I'm pointing to our perceptions is that our perceptions arise out of this field of awareness, and our minds are used to labeling these things. Microphone, sound, what is this thing? What do you call this? Podium, whatever it is. There's a special name for it, I'm sure, cup. Okay? But we forget the perceptual field. We forget there's a perceptual field, and the perceptual field's always there. The reason I point at sound first, and I encourage you when you go away to remember that and take a look at it in your practice. Sound is wonderful because it's very, very like thought. Do people notice that? It's very, very similar. There's a silent field, and out floats the stuff, which is, again, why I joked and you were allowed to laugh, but nobody did about the shout in the distance. But it is very like that. It's like a voice comes into your head, isn't it? Or a picture, sometimes a picture, but it's usually a voice or a picture. The difference is that when we're sitting here silently and a sound comes up, we don't tend to identify it with it because we know we're being quiet. We're sitting here being quiet, right? Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when a sound comes up, we don't go, that's me. We know it's not me because we know I'm sitting here being quiet, right? So it's just something that floats up at random. But the reason I do that exercise right back to back against thought is thought comes up in almost exactly the same way. It's especially verbal thought. It comes as though out of nowhere. And it's as though we hear it in our heads. But could you see the subtle difference where the mind latches on and goes, whoop, that's me. That's mine. Okay. But if it was mine, then wouldn't we be in charge of our thoughts? Really what it is there's a sense in which it's mine, right? The thing that makes Zen seem so confusing is we want to say, okay, I'm either one, or I'm nothing, or I'm everything, or I'm me, or I'm not me, or, The truth is that these concepts can overlay, and you don't have to crystallize out into one side or another. You can actually hold these apparently opposing ways of seeing the world in one's mind. And actually, for me at least, I have a really active mind. And as long as I turn that back into practice, it serves me really well. So for me, my thought process and my perceptual process in growing through practice was maybe something like, okay, here I am, me, and there's something about this I don't like. I don't get what I want, it hurts, it's uncomfortable, and I have the sense that behind this world there's a better, more perfect world, and why am I not there, right? Okay, why isn't that my experience? And then as we continue practice, oftentimes what happens is we have some experiences of that perfection, and then we go, oh, there it is! And then when we go, oh, there it is, we automatically create some separation, right? We automatically create separation, and we spend a little time scrabbling out of, oh, there it is, and wanting to grasp that. And that doesn't work, does it? Because then we've put it over there when it's actually us to start with. And then eventually, for me, the light bulb goes off, and this is insight, and insight doesn't always crystallize into thought, but sometimes it does, and when it does, it's okay. Our minds are our own territory. We're allowed to navigate them as we will. Sometimes people throw out really good insights. Sometimes teachers will question them and make them test insights, and then sometimes they'll throw them away. That can be a good process, especially if you're a monk. If you're in the monastery for years and years and years, you'll eventually get it clarified. But some people go away confused because they just did that one retreat, and then they go away, wait a minute, and then 10 years before they do another retreat, and they're all baffled. So I think somehow as lay people, not being able to practice at that level, it's okay to recognize that we're in charge of that process. We don't have to go, we don't have to check everything out with our teacher. So for me, and it's okay to work with our own minds in the interim if we have to. So, and some people can work with their own minds. I meet people who've been off practicing ever since the 60s, and they wander into a Zen center, and they can be very clear, and they've never done formal practice. Sometimes clearer than people who've done a lot of formal practice and have been conditioned by it. So what goes off in my head is, well, okay, first of all, I felt there was me. Then I felt that there was a more perfect world, like enlightenment. And then I started to have some glimpses, and I started to think that was something to get and to go after that. And then that started to recede, and then I kind of went, whoa, this is all screwed up. I'm really confused. I practiced for a few more years. But then the bulb goes off, which is an insight crystallized into thought of, wait a minute, there can only be one reality, right? That starts to surface through practice. There's only one reality. Okay, we have different ways of seeing reality. We all know what it's like to see reality as individuated, right? But we also all know, because we're born into this, we know what it's like to see reality as undifferentiated, because that's the way. When we're born and we start to perceive things, we don't know what anything is. We don't know it's divided up. All we know is there's this stuff going in. We don't know what any of it's called. We don't know where it is. We wouldn't know how to place it in space. Okay? And we've forgotten that because we've built up this categorizing ability of the mind. But we all have experienced it. And so when we come back to practice, we tend to feel that something has gone out of our lives, but we tend to have a faint memory of it, or a perception that it's there somewhere, right? But we do think it's somewhere else. But just consider it for a moment. Where else would you find it? Where else would it be? Could it possibly be? What's reality? What's reality? What's the only thing we know about reality, for sure?
Now.
Yeah, in this moment, here we seem to be, and we can even question that. But, the human mind is wonderful in our ability to remember from the past and project into the future. Nobody's saying we shouldn't do that. But that's the mind of separation that we build up, right? We forget that that's only in our minds. That past, we can't retrieve the past. It's not real. We can't repeat it. We can't remember all of it. Most of it's forgotten. If you and I lived through the same moment of the past, we wouldn't be able to agree on it. If it was filmed, something would be left out. There's no way to fasten upon the past in a way that makes it real in the way that this moment is. So this moment now this is where you find the eternal. And even if I'm 52 now, if we tend to project it into the future. Okay, at some point in the future, my practice is going to perfect and crystallize, and I will understand. But when it happens, if it's 10 years from now, it'll still be now. Right? When you're there, it'll be now, won't it? Mm-hmm. There's no other. You're always experiencing now. That's the only experience we have. Right? I'm not saying that the past didn't exist. We have that view, but I'm pointing to this other view. Okay. So we have two ways of perceiving reality. We can see it as differentiated. We can see it as unified. Right? But everybody actually has the unified view. I can demonstrate it to you really, really easily. Remove yourself from reality. Go ahead. If you think you're individual, remove yourself from the universe right now. Remove one object from the universe. Take something out of the environment. You actually, it can't be done. It's obvious to all of us, right? That we can't remove ourselves from our environment. We can kill ourselves, but then there's a body to deal with. Okay, and we don't know what happens to the life force or any other force. We can actually, if I want to remove this little sack in which I put my vestments, I could burn it, but that's just changing its form and it's releasing it into energy. Right? I actually can't take this out of reality. It's a very simple, small thing, but I can't remove it from reality. So reality is unified, isn't it? Isn't it obvious? We can't take anything out of it. Therefore, it's one thing. Just because we're portable and we can move around in it doesn't mean that we're independent. And when people get into it's true that in some sense, through our perceptions, we are creating reality, but that doesn't mean that we're in charge of it. Has anyone noticed that? Okay. And when people can easily have that insight. And then that's what happens when you fasten on a concept and it runs away with you. We have the insight that we create reality through our perceptions and through our minds. And it's very true. You being over there is something I create in my mind. You're actually not over there. Over there, if I didn't have sight, and sight was suddenly given to me, I wouldn't know where over there was. I would grope and I wouldn't know where you were. And you see children do that. That's why we hang those brightly colored toys. You see them reach out and try and figure out where things are in space, right? They're actually creating a spatial map in their minds. So we've all had that experience. But we lose sight of the unified view because we get so good at carving everything up. So we're returned to the unified view. But it doesn't mean we lose the diverse view, or that we go out and we don't take care of ourselves, or that we walk in front of a truck. We still have an individual self to take care of, but we also can perceive this unified self. And at first it does feel like something different, but the more we practice, the more these things come together. So, especially at this moment when I'm kind of pinned down and I have to show up, and here I am, it's not so hard to have those two things interlevered. In fact, probably we've all been practicing just, drop out past, drop out future, drop out over there-ness, spatial awareness. Can you kind of feel that the eternal moment is here at this moment? It's right here. In fact, now doesn't even move. If you really fasten on now, it doesn't even move. How many people can get some sense of that just from sitting here? So that's where you go in, and then when you come out of that, not that you even go in because you're already there, right? But that's how, with our minds, we return to that, and also that's how we remember it. So now is always where you're headed. It's always in here. It's not going to come. We're never going to get enlightened in 10 years because 10 years is never. 10 years is just going to be now all over again. How are we doing on time? Because I thought this clock was actually telling me the time, but it's actually subtracting time, so I've gotten completely confused. 5 more minutes. Okay, good. I need 5 minutes to summarize this. So the way my mind works is, so when I have the insight, wait, there's got to be only one reality. That's a logical insight, isn't it? But then I take it back and I balance it against practice and I say, okay, is that true? Can I really find any difference between the unified world and the one world and the world of diversity? And if I can't find any difference, can I find a way to demonstrate it to you? And I think we were just a little bit successful maybe in doing that. So, but the thing is that if you've been around a number of teachers and people who've experienced this practice, diversity operates in a funny way, which is everyone will explain it differently. And everyone will understand it differently. So it's okay for you to understand it differently. And it's okay for you to go ask another teacher about it and for them to confuse you by saying something else. But, you're the final arbiter of your practice. And it doesn't matter if you call it Zen or Taoism or Yoga or whatever you call it. It doesn't matter if you call it one self or no self. Eventually all those differences go away. We have to live in some sort of sensory reality. And if we just try and dwell in complete emptiness, then we just are non-functional. Right? We just are gone. So what we tend to do in practice, we come back like one step from there. So we can still feel that. And but we move through the world feeling that. And the next thing people tend to ask me is, well, so why should I go through all this trouble to do this? And I love these questions, but I feel like people wouldn't be coming to a practice center unless they wanted that in some way. That's what that experience is, and it's not that we're going to. Another way to express it that's common to all spiritual paths is, okay, you cannot call it no self, you can call it letting go of the self, right? But the real view really is you don't even have to let go of the self because it isn't there to start with, really. It really isn't there to start with. It exists in a kind of conditional reality, okay, in a conditional way of viewing reality. So you're still going to have to go have dinner. I'm certainly going to. So, but we have to take care of the individual self. But in the larger view, it's all we let go of is the false concept that we're fundamentally separate. And I just challenge everybody to demonstrate the fundamental separateness. Somebody keel over dead now. Do it. Okay. When people come and say, well, I'm creating the whole thing, whatever I think is going to happen. Well, that may seem to happen for a little while, maybe. But I don't, I just say, okay, decide not to die. Many people have tried that. I don't know of one who's managed it, at least not, and stayed in this reality. Who knows, if there's other conditional realities. It's not something we even really take up. And so it's not necessary to, you can just get confused. So we got one ego, isn't that enough? We want 20 others, 50 others, 1,000 others spread through lifetime upon lifetime upon lifetime. We take care of this moment. That's what we do in practice. And but paradox is okay. So we do create our reality, right? We create this sense of space, this sense of separation. Everybody builds it up in their own mind. At the same time, it's like, yeah, we create our children, but you sure can't control them. Has anybody here ever not been a child or had one? No, okay, everyone's done. Okay, so we all know that. We all know that we're created in some sense, not of our own volition, but we're not controlled. The reality is much like that. We do create it in some way, but that doesn't mean we want to collapse it into one side. We create it, therefore we control it. It's more complicated than that, But we can hold both things. It's created, but we're not the boss. Okay, guess that's all I have to say. So, but don't believe me is the last thing I have to say, because. And I'm sorry to disturb your meditation is another thing to say. But I disturb it because I want you to go home and actually consider this for yourself and look into it, because that friction between what we know and what we don't know, and finding that edge of, but wait a minute, And then you go and you look in, and that friction is actually where insight occurs. And insight should be occurring in our practice. It should be occurring. And it's an infinitely finessey process. And it's wonderful when it happens, because Because then the miracle of life is revealed all the time, and then we don't have to wonder why we're doing this thing that hurts and is difficult. Never. It's just like we know it's worth doing. You know, just like we're born knowing that. Our children know that if they have what they need. They're not like wandering around going, oy vey. We learn to do that, okay? We learn to go, oh, why do I live? Why do I suffer? Okay, but picture yourself at 7 years old, 6 years old. If a kid has everything they need, they just, when they fall down, it hurts, they get up and they play again. Right? So they return to joy. So that's our birthright. So, suffering's an illusion that gets in the way. So I wish us all deliverance from that illusion. Thank you all.